There are sentences that once spoken cannot be taken back, cannot be recontextualized, cannot be softened by what came before or after. Sentences that exist permanently, archivally, searchably, as the most honest thing a person ever accidentally said. Kody Brown said one of those sentences, on camera, in his own home, to the production team that had been documenting his family for years. And when it aired, when it reached the millions of people who had been watching this family and building theories about what was really happening beneath the surface, the internet stopped. Because in that sentence, in that specific filmed, time-stamped, irrefutable moment, Kody Brown told the truth about missing his children, about whether he did. And the answer, the actual unguarded, caught on tape answer, was not what a father of 18 children who had spent 17 seasons talking about family love should ever have been able to say. If this kind of deep, honest breakdown of the sister wives story is what you've been looking for, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the SW Daily. We are here every single week reading the archive carefully so you don't have to do it alone. Today, we are examining that moment, frame by frame, word by word, and we are asking the question his children have been living with ever since. What do you do with a father who admits on tape that he doesn't miss you? Let's start with the architecture of the contradiction, because to understand why that sentence hit the way it did, you have to understand what was built before it. For 17 seasons, Kody Brown's public identity was constructed entirely on the premise of extraordinary paternal love. More wives, more children, more family, more love. The scale of the family was treated as the evidence of love. 18 children were, implicitly, 18 separate pieces of proof that Kody Brown loved being a father. That was the brand. That was what the show sold, season after season, in its opening credits, in its confessionals, in its promotional materials. This man loves his family. This man chose this life because of that love. And the children, all 18 of them, were the living testimony to a devotion that went further than most men would go. And then, in a moment that production probably didn't even flag as significant, in a conversation that may have felt completely unremarkable in the room, Kody said something that quietly, conversationally, without apparent awareness of what he was doing, dismantled the entire brand. Because the most honest moments are rarely the dramatic ones. They are not the shouting matches or the tearful confessionals or the confrontations staged for maximum emotional impact. They're the ones where someone stops performing and just answers the question, without the usual careful architecture of image management, without the pivot to complexity, without the rehearsed language of a man who knows a camera is in the room and adjusts accordingly. Just the answer, raw, unfiltered, real. And the answer in this case was that he didn't miss his children the way a father who had spent 17 seasons building an identity around loving them should miss his children. And once that answer exists in the world, once it is time-stamped and uneditable and permanently part of the public record, every season that came before it is suddenly visible in a completely different light. Not the light of a devoted father navigating an extraordinarily complicated family structure. The light of a man whose relationship to his own children was always more complicated than the brand was ever willing to admit. Now, I want to be genuinely fair about the complexity here, because this channel is not interested in cheap takedowns. Missing someone is not simple. It is entirely possible to love someone deeply without actively missing them in a moment, particularly when the relationship has been strained, distant, or complicated over time. The absence of acute longing does not automatically signal the absence of love. Human emotions emotional experience is rarely that clean or that binary. And there will be people, Kody's defenders, who reach for exactly that nuance, who says, you're oversimplifying, you're taking one sentence out of a complex emotional reality and building too much on top of it. But here is what makes this moment impossible to fully reframe. And it comes down to one word: context. The context in which that statement was made. It was not made in the context of a healthy, naturally distant relationship where children had grown up and moved on and built their own lives at a comfortable remove from a father who loved them and them. It was not made by a man reflecting philosophically on how love and longing don't always travel together. It was made in the context of active, ongoing, documented estrangement, of children who had gone on the record publicly and painfully expressing that they felt fatherless, of a family fracturing in real time on camera in front of millions of viewers who had been watching long enough to have opinions about everyone involved. In that context, in the specific context of children who were actively grieving their father's presence in their lives, a father saying he doesn't miss them is not a nuanced statement about the complexity of longing. It is a window into who he actually is underneath the brand in the unscripted spaces between the performance. And what the window shows for the children who have spent their whole lives asking quietly, with varying degrees of hope, whether they were missed when they were not there, is an answer they deserved not to have to receive this way. On tape, on television, in a format accessible to anyone with an internet connection, including them. Here is what that sentence did in practical, measurable human terms. It confirmed what his children had already suspected. And confirmation, even painful confirmation, is categorically different from suspicion. Suspicion lives in the uncomfortable middle space where you're not certain if what you're feeling reflects reality or if you're being unfair to someone who loves you in ways you can't fully see. Suspicion says, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he does think about me when I'm not there. Maybe the distance is circumstance and not preference. Maybe the silence is complicated and not indifferent. Maybe if I reached out, he'd reach back. Suspicion is painful, but it contains something that confirmation does not. It contains a maybe. And that maybe, small as it is, functions as a kind of hope, a cushion between what you fear and what you know. Confirmation removes the maybe permanently. And when the maybe is removed, when a father's own words captured on his own show in his own home confirm the thing you had always been quietly afraid was true, something shifts. Not dramatically, not in the way of a sudden revelation that changes everything in an instant, permanently, quietly, like a door closing on a room you'd been keeping just slightly open, just in case, just for the possibility that you were wrong about what was on the other side. The children who heard that statement, the ones who watched that episode or found it later in the archive that television creates and time preserves, no longer had to wonder. And the grief of no longer having to wonder, the specific, quiet, unshakable grief of confirmed suspicion, is one of the heaviest things a person can carry, even an adult child. Even an adult child who has already been building a full and meaningful life at a distance from their father. Because somewhere in the quietest part of that building was a hope, a small one, a resilient one, the hope that they were still missed, that somewhere across the complicated distance of estrangement, in a house with a new configuration of family, he thought of them, not constantly, not in ways that disrupted his life, just enough to confirm that they occupied a real space in his awareness, that their absence registered, that they were, in some specific and irreplaceable way, present to him even when they were not present. And that hope, small, quiet, still there after everything, was taken from them by his own words, on his own show, in the room where he forgot, just for a moment, to manage the narrative. Here is what fans who have been watching this show closely need to understand about that moment and why it resonated so completely and so immediately across the fandom. It was not the only time Kody revealed something true about his relationship to his children's absence. It was simply the most explicit, the most direct, the hardest to reframe. But if you go back through the footage across multiple seasons and watch specifically with the question of how Kody responds when children are not there, what you find is a consistent, documentable pattern that tells the same story before the sentence ever gave it language. He adapts quickly, too quickly, in ways that are visible when you know what to look for. He does not appear in the footage available across 17 seasons to visibly struggle with absence the way parents who are genuinely, acutely missing their children struggle. He does not appear to be fighting an urge to call, to show up uninvited, to find a way through the protocol or the distance or the complicated emotional terrain of a fractured relationship to reach the specific child who is not there. He does not appear to be white-knuckling his way through the ache of an empty chair or a missed birthday or a holiday that passed without the person he loves. Instead, consistently, across seasons, he adapts. He reorganizes his attention around what is present. He focuses on the household that is functioning, on the relationships that are immediate, on the life happening directly in front of him. He manages efficiently, visibly, without appearing to spend excessive energy grieving what is absent. And that management, efficient and functional and visible across years of footage, tells exactly the same story as the sentence. That the absence of his children, however painful it might be in theory, in the abstract, in the language of a confessional camera, was not, in practice, the kind of wound that drives a parent to their knees, was not the thing that kept him up, was not the specific, persistent, daily ache that most estranged parents describe when they talk honestly about what it feels like to be separated from children they love. And his children, who had access to the same footage every viewer did, who were watching, who noticed the adaptation and the management and the efficiency of his release, drew their conclusions. Long before the sentence gave those conclusions a clean, simple, irrefutable confirmation. What that sentence reveals about Kody Brown's character is something specific, and I think it is important to name it precisely rather than just use it as evidence of general failure. He is, based on everything the show has documented, a man who bonds most completely, most fully, most genuinely with what is directly in front of him. Present relationships, present households, present children in present rooms. What is not in front of him, what is distant or estranged or absent, does not appear to occupy him the way it occupies most parents. Most parents of estranged children, when they speak honestly about the experience, describe something specific, a low-level, constant ache. A persistent background awareness of the missing person, the empty chair that never stops being empty, the phone that doesn't ring and whose silence you notice every single time, the birthday that arrives and passes and sits in your chest for days afterward. These things hurt continuously, specifically daily, in ways that accumulate rather than fade. And that persistent daily hurt drives action. It drives the reaching out, the message that says, I know things are complicated between us, but I need you to know what I think about you. They show up, even imperfectly, even at risk of being turned away. The refusal to let the distance become permanent because the ache of their absence is too specific and too insistent to permit the comfortable settling into life without them. Kody does not appear, based on the available evidence across 17 seasons, emotions to experience that particular ache in that particular way. He loves fully what is present and appears to release with relative efficiency what is not. And I want to be clear, that is not necessarily a moral failure. It is a character's reality, a way of being in the world that some people have and others do not. But for children who needed to be held in their father's awareness, even in their absence, even across estrangement, even when things were complicated and painful and unresolved, that character reality was one of the most expensive things about him. Because what it meant functionally in their daily lives was, when you are not here, you are not quite here to him. And children who feel that, who sense it before they can name it, build their distance accordingly, not out of cruelty, out of protection, against the specific and particular pain of being easily released by someone whose love they needed to be permanent. After the moment aired, after the sentence reached the fandom and produced the reaction it produced, there was some effort at contextualization, at explaining what he really meant, at pointing to the fuller conversation and suggesting the clip was being taken out of context, at softening the edges of something that did not have soft edges. And I want to sit with that effort for a moment, because context does matter, and this channel tries to operate in good faith. But here is what no amount of contextualization can fully address. The sentence was not extracted from a nuanced philosophical discussion about the nature of longing in complicated relationships. It was not a careful, mediated statement that requires extensive background to interpret correctly. It was, in the context of the conversation in which it appeared, a relatively direct expression of his current emotional experience. And his current emotional experience, apparently, in that moment, in that room, in that house, did not include actively missing the children who were not there. And whatever the full context, however generous the reframing, his children heard it, or will hear it, or have already heard it. And the contextualization that follows, however sincerely offered, cannot unhear it for them, cannot remove the specific sting of a father's own words landing as confirmation of something they had always hoped was not true. Some sentences cannot be walked back, not because they are uniquely terrible, but because they are uniquely true. And truth, particularly the kind that confirms a long-held fear, does not respond to reframing. It just is. And his children are living in the world where it was said, and cannot live in it. Here is the core moral of this entire story, and I believe it is one of the most important things this show has accidentally documented across its entire run. You cannot build an identity on love and then be caught not missing the people you love. You cannot spend 17 seasons telling an audience of millions that your children are your greatest purpose, your legacy, your calling, your proof that this unconventional life works and produces something beautiful, and then, in an unguarded moment, reveal that their absence does not hollow you, does not keep you up, does not drive you to the phone or the car or the door of the child who needs to know they are being thought of. Love, genuinely felt for specific people, produces longing in their absence. It produces an ache, the awareness, the persistence of someone's presence in your thoughts, even when they are physically somewhere else entirely. And the absence of that longing, revealed in a sentence, confirmed in a pattern, consistent across seasons of documented behavior, tells you something about love. Not necessarily that it doesn't exist, but that has always been primarily about Kody's experience of being a father rather than his children's experience of being fathered. He loved the role. He loved them in the role. He loved the version of family that was present and functional and confirmed his identity as a patriarch of something extraordinary. But the them, the specific, individual, irreplaceable them, apparently did not occupy the space in his heart that would make their absence a wound that demanded repair. And that distinction between loving fatherhood and loving the specific people fatherhood gave you is everything. It is the difference between a father and a man who plays one. And the sentence is where the distinction became undeniable. Here is where things stand in the aftermath of all of this. The sentence is part of the record now, permanent, searchable, available to anyone who wants to find it at any point in the future for any reason, including now or at some future moment, the children it was specifically about. And Kody, in the house where he lives now with the family that remains, carries the knowledge that those words exist in the world, that they were filmed, that they aired, that they were heard and clipped and discussed and used as evidence in an ongoing public accounting of who he actually is. And he cannot take them back. He cannot revise the archive. He cannot make the sentence unsaid because television doesn't offer that option. The record is the record. What he can do, and this is important because this channel is not interested in closing doors that remain even slightly open, is make the sentence untrue through behavior, through showing up, through being in the time that remains, the kind of father whose actions make that sentence look like an artifact of a painful period he has since corrected, rather than an accurate description of who he fundamentally is. That is still available to him. The choice is still his. Whether the sentence becomes a historical data point in a story that eventually improved, or whether it stands years from now as an accurate description of a man who never closed the gap between who he said he was and who he actually turned out to be, that question remains genuinely open. And it is a question only he can answer with behavior. Because he has enough words. He has always had enough words. What has been in short supply is the thing that words, however eloquent, can never substitute for. Here is my prediction, and I want to offer it with the care it deserves. That sentence will become one of the most referenced moments in the entire history of Sister Wives. Not because it is the most dramatic. This show has had dramatic moments, shouting matches and ultimatums and departures and returns and confrontations that were designed, consciously or not, for maximum impact. This sentence was none of those things. It was quiet, conversational, caught rather than performed. And that is precisely why it will last. Because honesty, unguarded and accidental, has a permanence that drama simply does not. Drama can be reframed as passion or pain or complexity. Honesty just is. It sits in the record and waits to be found. And people find it and share it and return to it and use it to make sense of everything that surrounded it. That sentence will be the thing people quote when they try to explain what Sister Wives was really about beneath the theology and the brand and the 17 seasons of proclaimed devotion. It was about a man who loved the idea of his children more than he could sustain the reality of them, who loved fatherhood as a role more than he was able to practice it as a verb, whose children, all 18 of them, built their lives around a truth they intuited long before he accidentally said it out loud on his own show, in his own home, to the cameras that had been recording everything all along. And those children, the ones who carried the weight of that intuition for years before the sentence confirmed it, are building extraordinary lives. They are thriving. They are parenting and working and loving and becoming people whose stories do not require their father's absence to define them. They have made the sentence into background, into context, into something that explains a chapter rather than determining the whole book. And that, more than anything else, is the thing worth saying at the end of all of this. Not that Kody failed. Everyone watching already knows how to measure that. But that the people his failure most directly affected are okay. Are more than okay, are living proof that the children who don't get to be their father's wound have an extraordinary capacity to become their own reason. That is the real archive, and we are here to read all of it. Subscribe to the SW Daily. We are not going anywhere, and neither is the truth.